Greetings, folks. Iolair here. Well, many of you know that I am a German cruiser fanatic, so you can imagine my excitement when Wargaming released the premium Tier 7 German light cruiser München to the premium shop today. I did promptly go out, pick her up. I've played a couple of games, and so I'm here to offer my first impressions and review of this ship. Now, as I do with my other reviews, I have some gameplay. This is actually from the first two matches I played, and I'll talk about how I think her playstyle will work, where I think she will do well, where I think she might struggle, and then I'll go to port, talk through her ship specifications, talk about my build with commander skills, ship upgrades, stuff like that, and I'll offer some final thoughts. Now, I also have an index in the video description below, so if you guys want to jump around, if you want to skip the gameplay and go straight to the build or other aspects or parts of the video, feel free to do that. Now, I am going to do a lot of comparisons with two ships that I think she's being compared with. One is the Tech Tree Tier 6 cruiser, the Nuremberg, as well as with the premium Tier 8 cruiser, the Mainz. In fact, I've seen some reviews that have sort of described her as a mini Mainz, and I'm here to tell you now, right up front, before I lose most of the audience, if you have that impression, that is not a good impression, in my opinion. In my view, she plays mostly like a Tier 7 Nuremberg. Her similarities are much closer to the Nuremberg in terms of her play style and characteristics than with the Mainz. But again, I'll get more into that here in a moment. So this first match I had was a Tier 8 battle on shards. There are carriers in play. I think it's a Tier 6 carrier. The next game that is in the video is a Tier 9 match that didn't have carriers. But both of these are probably a good display of how she can perform. So what you see here is going to be fairly typical of her characteristics. She is a long-range HE spammer. She has a base reload of 5 seconds. She has a range of 16.6 kilometers. A key difference, however, in her gunnery compared to both the Nuremberg and the Mainz is that her shells are much floatier. So both the Mainz and the Nuremberg have shells that come out of the barrels at 960 meters per second, which is straight up railguns. Now, German shells are quite light. They slow down at range. And even for the Nuremberg and Mainz, the shells get kind of floaty out past 12, 13, 14 kilometers. But with the München, you'll find that the shells actually get quite floaty within the first probably 7 or 8 kilometers. Now, it is totally playable at longer ranges. You will see as I'm going along here and I'm putting fire on some of these targets that I'm having to adjust my aiming because I am missing. And again, this is the first couple of matches I've had with her, so I'm learning her ballistics as part of this. But I found that it was fairly easy to adjust. And with a reload of 5 seconds, it's easy to correct your aim and then fire again and have a better chance at landing shots. Now, as is the case with a lot of long range, or in fact, all long range light cruisers, it's the name of the game is long range gunnery. A lot of kiting, a lot of use of terrain. You can see here that I'm firing from concealment on this North Carolina at about 11 kilometers and so on. So this is going to be her typical play style. So let me start drawing some comparisons between the München, the Nuremberg, and the Mainz. So the München and the München and the Nuremberg have quite similar health levels. The München has about 10% more health than the Nuremberg. And the DPM is very similar. So the München has DPM, which is about 6 2/3% higher DPM than the Nuremberg. So she can put out the damage a little faster. But where she excels compared to the Nuremberg is both in her concealment and her speed. So her concealment at best is 9.4 kilometers. And the Nuremberg, I think, is 10.6. I'm embarrassed I don't remember that off the top of my head because I play the Nuremberg a lot. she has much better concealment, which gives her much better flexibility in terms of positioning options and so on, and being able to escape situations where she might get detected. Another factor that affects her playability is her speed. She is uncharacteristically fast for a German cruiser. Her base speed is 36 knots. And so with a Sierra Mike signal, she will get up to 37.8 knots, which means that she can keep pace basically with destroyers, or a lot of destroyers. Obviously not the Soviets ones. I was trying to save my Monarch there from getting rammed, but didn't quite make it. So so she, with her speed and her concealment, she will have better engagement and disengagement and positioning options than a Nuremberg. But in terms of the general, like, fire from range, spam HE a lot, that is, very much how she will play. Now, when she gets in close, against targets that can take AP or take big AP hits like other cruisers, shooting into the superstructures of battleships and so on, you would want to use AP. But in the first couple of games, there's Iron Strike. By the way, I'm using Günther Lütjens from my Hindenburg on my Mainz for these, or on my München for these matches, and I did activate Iron Strike in both of them. Although the build that I would run for the München is probably different. In fact, I'm going to recommend something that's different than on what I run for Günther Lütjens on my Hindenburg. But in any case, yeah, the speed and concealment is going to give you quite a bit more flexibility, and otherwise you're just going to be doing a lot of long range spamming. You can see that I'm doing a lot of dodging and so forth. And this is another place where her speed and her concealment and maneuverability can give her a lot of flexibility. But you can also tell that I'm doing a lot of adjusting of my lead here in order to land my shots, because the salvos are floatier. They're not as bad as, like, let's say on an Atlanta, but they're definitely slower than on a Nuremberg and on a Mainz. Now, I want to come back to a comparison with the Mainz. So actually, before I do that, let me make sure this is clear. In my opinion, the München is basically an 8-gun Nuremberg. And that's the best way to describe her. She has much closer health to the Nuremberg than she does with the Mainz. She has very similar DPM characteristics. Her armor is also relatively similar, although it's better than on the Nuremberg, but it's not as good as on the Mainz. And so in terms of how you should think about her, in my opinion, is to think of her as a Nuremberg. All right, so let me draw comparisons with the Mainz, because I have seen some reviews that have described her as a mini Mainz, and I think that's a mistake. I think that's misleading, and people who might be considering getting the München are going to get, in my opinion, the wrong impression if it's described that way. Unfortunately, I'm going to bump into my carrier here. So the Mainz has 25% higher DPM than the München. The Mainz has a quarter more health, or in fact more than that. It's 30% more health. She has much better armor. Now, the Mainz doesn't have the same armor as on the Prinz Eugen or the Hipper, which is very good for a Tier 8 cruiser. But the München has significantly inferior armor compared to the Mainz. You've noticed here that my opponents have stopped firing on me, partly because of the train, but also because they basically got tired of firing at me. I think that's really what it was. I was just too far away. This is, again, a reflection of her playstyle. As I said, a couple more fires on this poor Fuso. I think I am going to finish her off. So the Mainz, outside of being a German light cruiser and firing 150 millimeter shells, almost everything else deviates heavily. I'm still in the first game. I've transitioned a couple of times where the action has kind of gotten slow, and I'm moved to basically the end of my participation in this game. I'm firing on the Gaeta because I'm afraid that he's going to charge in and try to do a run on our North Carolina. I do have Hydro running. I know that the Torpedoes are on the way. but I am going to make a mistake or misplay here in terms of my engagement. I am also giving broadside to the Algerie, which knows to be firing AP at me, or at least he will be. There are the torpedoes from the gate out. I make a judgment error here, thinking I'm going to have an opportunity to maneuver these, but I realized I've fired for too long, and I'm going to end up taking a torpedo here and going down. And we'll go to the second game I had. So in the first game, I did 136,000 in damage. And we do end up winning that match, which was nice. In this match, again, this is a tier 9 battle. It turns out that I'm on our team's weak flank and the opposing team's strong flank. In this particular game, I'm in division with Angry Ace, a colleague of mine who's playing the Shores. And I'm going to realize fairly early, in fact, I think at this point I've already realized that I need to be pulling away, because our Freddy, which is to my southwest, is actually further from the opponents than I am. And he should be the one tanking on this flank, but he isn't. And I can't tank for the team. And basically, I just don't have the armor to do it. While she is, like I said, while she is a little tankier than a Nuremberg, she's not materially tankier. And all of these shells, the 380s, the 406s, the 420s, everything is basically going to wreck me. These battleships only need to get one lucky shell on me, and they're going to take out half of my health. So I need to be very careful about my engagements here. So I'll be pulling back. In fact, there's going to be a point where, I get targeted by 2, 3, 4, 5 opponents. Thankfully, the Tirpitz here is firing HE. Gets a little bit of chip damage on me, but not too much. You get a fire on, I think that was on the Iowa. But yeah, it's in situations like this that the München cannot tolerate any prolonged engagements. But again, thanks to her very good concealment and her uncharacteristically good speed, especially for a German cruiser, she can flee these situations pretty reliably. Unfortunately, the horn here does set me on fire again, and I had damage controlled something else, so I'm going to burn for a little while. Now, one thing that's kind of interesting, with a base reload of 5 seconds, with a healthy dose of adrenaline rush and iron strike from Günther Lütjens kicking in, the reload on this ship will drop below 4 seconds, which is pretty nice. All right, one other comparison I want to make with the Nuremberg is regarding the shells. So while the shells are floatier, the penetration characteristics of the AP on the München are slightly better than they are on the Nuremberg. So you will find that at some ranges you will get better AP penetration with the München than you would with the Nuremberg. But again, like I said, in the first 2 matches I played, I was basically always kiting and always moving away or repositioning and firing from longer ranges. So I didn't really get a chance to use the AP much, if at all. But when I have matches where I have AP, I might feature some of those so you get an idea. Especially if I'm in a top tier situation, I'm going to be able to fight other cruisers more reliably, and I'll be able to get in closer and be able to bring the German AP to bear. So here I'm basically just fleeing, dodging and kiting these guys. In fact, I think I end up with almost 1 million potential damage in this particular battle, just sort of throwing the shots off. In fact, these battleships end up eventually stop targeting me because I keep missing or dodging their salvos, and they just kind of get tired. But fortunately, also some of our allies that were over in the west start moving east, and they start drawing some of the fire for our team. And then I can put in a little more shot. In fact, at this point, you can see now that I'm not being targeted at all. So the opponents here, well, now I get targeted again. But these opponents have generally been, gotten tired of firing at me. I'm going to turn away here from the Iowa, and I think I'm going to dodge this entire salvo. But again, he only has to get 1 lucky shell, and he takes out half of my health in a hurry. So that's where the risks are with this ship. Transition again here because I had to pull away and then start pushing back in once the opposing battleships got distracted by some of my allies that were pushing into the mid. And this way I can fire on them freely without having to, be concerned that they're going to start firing on me. Tirpitz is the only target right now that I can shoot at. I would prefer to put fire on the Freddy because he's lower health, but he's just a little bit out of my range. One of the thing that I would recommend if when you're firing at long range, and this is something I figured out in the second match, is when you zoom in, knock the zoom out by one level. It makes the aiming, and that's what I'm doing here. It makes the aiming a little bit easier. That's something that I normally don't have to do on German cruisers because the shells are fast enough that even at very long ranges, I don't need to bring back the zoom any. But in the case of the München, I found that it was quite useful in terms of getting the aim down correctly. I don't know why the Iowa pulled away, the opposing Iowa that's now on the 10 line. Like he pulled away like he did. This Tirpitz is going to finish off the Almagi, I think. And then we noticed that the low health Massachusetts is pushing through south of Bravo, and I'm going to put fire on him. So again, another benefit of being a German cruiser, I get the 1/4 pen on my HE, which means my 150s. Oh, by the way, there's Iron Strike. My 150 millimeter AP is going to, or HE, I should say, is going to penetrate the 38 millimeter deck of upper tier U.S. Navy battleships. So that definitely helps in being able to take down targets like that Massachusetts. Was hoping I would get a double strike there by taking down the Tirpitz. Now I'm going to transition basically to the last scene of the second match I had. I discovered the Östergötland, but this was a little bit more of him stumbling into my detection rather than me going and hunting him. And that's actually going to get to a discussion about build. This is going to be a ship that I think would strongly benefit from radio location because with her high rate of fire, her very good concealment, and her good speed, the München, out of all of the German light cruisers, is arguably among the best destroyer hunters as far as cruisers are concerned in the game. I'm going to take down the Östergötland. We do end up winning this match, and then I'm going to go to the port, and we'll talk about her characteristics there. Okay, so here we are with the München in port. We'll start with her armor. She is a light cruiser. That means she's going to have a 60 millimeter bow and stern. That's standard for a tier 7 light cruiser. Her deck is 25 millimeters, which means it can bounce 356 millimeter shells or 14-inch shells for those of you in the US. When they're in close quarters, at longer ranges, through plunging fire, basically everything's going to come through the deck and penetrate. Her upper plate is 20 millimeters, which is going to be overmatched by a lot. And basically every battleship's going to over-penetrate this plating, even when well angled. Her main plate is 50 millimeters, which will bounce all AP shell sizes when well angled, but you can see there's not that much that's 50 millimeters. Her turrets are reasonably well protected. They have a 100 millimeter frontal plate. I don't remember that I've ever had her turrets knocked out yet in the first 2 matches I played with her. And her superstructure is 10 millimeters, which is standard for a light cruiser. She does, technically speaking, look like she carries a turtle back. She has these slope armor decks, but you can see how high, well, first of all, you can see how long her citadel is, and you can see how high the citadel raises above the waterline. So I have not been citadeled yet in game. I've just been lucky. But I think basically at any angle, any range, battleships are going to be able to hit her citadel pretty reliably. The slope deck might help deflect heavy cruiser rounds in close quarters, but I don't think it will do much beyond that, to be honest with you. So again, this is a key reason why I think a comparison with the armor scheme of, let's say, like the Mainz, and describing her as a mini Mainz is not a good comparison, certainly with regard to the armor. Survivability, she has 30,200 hit points. She has a modest amount of torpedo protection, damage reduction, 10%. That's pretty common for mid-tier light cruisers. So she has, like I said, she has about, well, probably 12% more health than a Nuremberg at 27,000, but she is markedly lower health pool than, let's say, like a York. So the tier 7 counterpart, she's going to have about, well, not about 8% less. Mainz is going to have way more. Mainz has 30% more health than the München. So again, she doesn't have a very big health pool to work with. Excuse me. Artillery, she has 850 millimeter guns with a reload of 15 seconds. The base turret traverse is 20 seconds, which is actually quite fast. You don't really need expert marksman, although I do have it here for Günther Lütjens, which I brought over from my Hindenburg. I take expert marksman on the Hindenburg because I'm using it to offset the impact of main battery modification 3 in slot 6. But the München's base turret rotation is pretty quick. So if you are working on developing a commander, I would definitely pick up Adrenaline Rush as your first level 2 skill and only pick up Expert Marksman as like one of the last skills that you pick up for any commander you're developing for this ship. Her range is 16.6 kilometers, which is like 1/10 of 1 kilometer longer than the Nuremberg. Yeah, Nuremberg is 16.5. But her, again, the big difference in her shell, so her alpha, I should say, and her fire chance and everything, and the HE penetration, etc., are the same between the München and the Nuremberg and the Mainz. But the big difference is her shell speed. So her initial shell velocity is 875 meters per second, whereas on the Nuremberg and the Mainz, it's 960. So you definitely are going to see floatier shells. But again, I found it's playable out to range. It just requires some practice on the aiming. You're probably not going to be hitting like destroyers at 15 kilometers reliably, if at all. But certainly your bigger targets, your cruisers and your battleships, you should be able to hit at range with good lead. Okay. Um, let's see. Secondaries, she has um, two guns, or two turrets, I should say, double barrel, one on each side. These are the standard 105 millimeter long range artillery dual purpose mounts that pretty much all of the mid and upper tier German ships get. Let's see, torpedoes. So I didn't talk about this during the gameplay, but she carries one set of 4 torpedoes on each side of the ship. These are the standard German and cruiser torpedoes. They have a 90-second reload. They go 6 kilometers. They have a 1.3 kilometer detection. The alpha is pretty low at 13,700. So if you're familiar with the torpedo systems of battleships and the cruisers on the German ships, you'll be comfortable with these. Now, one thing that's interesting is that they're below deck. So unlike the vast majority, in fact, I think all other German cruisers, which have their torpedoes surface mounted. Actually, the Nuremberg has one set that's below deck. These should be slightly better protected. So the German battleships and cruisers have a history and a reputation of having their torpedo tubes destroyed because they are surface mounted on the deck, and having them below deck should give them some better protection. I haven't had a chance to use the torpedoes yet, and I haven't had the torpedoes knocked out, so I don't have enough history yet to say how survivable they are. But in terms of their playability, they're pretty good. I don't remember the torpedo angles, but actually I think that they're pretty good, even though they are below deck. I don't think that they're as quite as strong as when they're on deck, like we see with the other ships. But again, these are just going to be ambush, YOLO, or situations where you can take down an opponent as a sort of a last resort, or if they're distracted or something. So again, folks who are familiar with German torpedo systems will be comfortable with that. AA is nothing to write home about. It's better than the Nuremberg, but not by a whole lot. She has no mid-range AA. She has some modest long-range AA. Most of her AA is short range at 3 kilometers. The DPS for short range is actually quite good, but because it represents 80+% of her DPS, it just isn't that strong, in my opinion. again, I've only faced one tier 6 carrier. I haven't been in a situation where I've had to face tier 8s. I think tier 8 she will struggle, but against tier 6 carriers, she probably will do okay. So AA just isn't that impressive. And it's definitely going to be substantially worse than the Mainz. The Mainz has actually quite good AA for a tier 8 ship because she has good DPS across both medium, long, and short range. All right. Sorry, coming back to the München. Maneuverability, I talked about this beforehand. So her base speed is 36 knots, which for folks who play German cruisers regularly is basically a speed that's unheard of. And I have a Sierra mic signal mounted, so it's up to 37.8 knots. So she is quick. And that, again, is going to work to her advantage. Now, her base rudder is 8.3 seconds. I do have the propulsion modification upgrade in slot 4, which is what I would generally recommend, but folks obviously play this as you want. If you put the steering gears modification upgrade in slot 4, the rudder shift comes down to, I think, 6.6 or 6.6 seconds, which is quite quick. So she is quite maneuverable, and obviously, like I said, she's quite fast. Concealment, I talked about this during the gameplay. Her best concealment is 9.4, so that includes the concealment expert skill as well as the camouflage. So she can definitely, with between her speed and her good concealment, she has the means to get herself out of trouble. If it looks like she's on a flank where she's got to flee, like I had in that second game that I featured. Her detectability range by air is 5.2, which is actually pretty good because her AA range is 5.2 as well. So that means that she, unlike most German cruisers, which have a differential between the time that they're detected by air and they actually their AA can engage, the München her AA will engage uh, at her aerial detection range. So that's quite good as well. And then her firing or her detection when firing within smoke is 4.9 kilometers, which is pretty small. So if you're divvied up with a player who's rocking smoke, she might be a very good close support cruiser to be able to get smoked in toward a cap and then be able to gun down an opposing destroyer and back up your allied destroyer that you're divisioned with. So that could be quite useful. All right, getting to her upgrades. So main armaments modification 1 is this gold standard. I wouldn't pick anything else. Slot 2, I picked up the hydroacoustic search special upgrade to extend the action time of the hydro. This is kind of the standard protocol I follow for German cruisers. If you are uninterested in getting that upgrade, I would choose the engine room protection. Keep your engine alive. Damage control to me is a little less critical because damage control comes up faster on cruisers and they don't burn quite as long. So I think to me it's more important to keep the engine and rudder alive. For slot 3, because she has only 8 shells, and because also her turrets are reasonably fast, I would take the aiming systems modification 1 upgrade to keep your shells reasonably tight so you can land as many shells as possible. And then lastly, and I mentioned this just a couple of minutes ago, I took the propulsion modification upgrade to give me faster off the line acceleration, excuse me. I think that's because her rudder is already relatively good, I think it's quite useful to have the faster rudder or faster propulsion so that you can maneuver a little more effectively. Okay, consumables, damage control, and fighter are available, and then you have the choice between hydro and defensive AA fire. German ship, I would take the hydro. Yes, there's lots of commentary today that defensive AA fire is useless. I don't think that is necessarily completely useless, but it is not as effective as it once was in being able to defend yourself against opponents, and especially since her AA is mediocre. Taking defensive AA fire to me would not be the right choice. I would take hydro. All right, let me get to my commander skills. Now, how I have this spec'd based on my Hindenburg from Günther Dütjens is not necessarily how I would spec her. And I talked about this again during the gameplay. So I think this ship would strongly benefit from radio location. She has the means to be a very good destroyer, hunter, killer, thanks to her speed and her good concealment and her excellent rate of fire, good DPM. She could fit that role quite well. So again, this would be more for like either your top tier and you're just going after some tier 5 destroyers that aren't being backed up by bigger guns, or it's a late game situation and you're trying to hunt down a destroyer like I ran into the Österjutland in the second game. That wasn't because I had radio location. It just happened to be that I stumbled into him, right? So if I were to take radio location, the skills I would drop are probably Superintendent, because she doesn't have a heal. I usually don't burn through all of my consumables as a mid-tier cruiser. If you would prefer to keep the extra charge of consumables, you could give up Demolition Expert. So that would be the level 3 skill I would give up. And then for a level 1 skill, either Expert Loader or Preventative Maintenance. Her reload is already very good. So on most cruisers, I take Expert Loader. I like having that skill because I like being able to make a really rapid switch to AP to catch, a broadside target that would be easily punished. But in this case, you could probably give that up and keep it preventative maintenance. So giving up Expert Loader and then one of these two would give you 4 points to put on radio location. Now, I'm not planning to respec Günther Dütjens to optimize him for the München. I might take, I have a, well, first world problems. I happen to have a spare 19-point commander that I'm not using for my Nuremberg or even my Hipper. So I could, I could take one of these guys and respec them and make them a dedicated commander for the München. So that's what I would go with as far as skills. Actually, let me take a quick step back. So the core 4 skills I would take would be Priority Target, Adrenaline Rush, and then one of either Demolition Expert or Superintendent, and then Concealment. And then after that, whatever else you want to take. All right. And then let me go real quickly to signals, since I tend to talk about that. So the 5 combat signals I would take if you have them. November Foxtrot to reduce the cooldown on your consumables. Sierra Mike, boost that really excellent speed even further. Then the 2 signals to improve the fire chance on the shells, so Victor Lima and India X-Ray. And then lastly, Juliet Charlie to eliminate the chance of detonation. Again, I happen to have a lot of signals. I'm very fortunate that's the case. If you do happen to have combat signals that you're willing to spend in games, those would be the 5 that I would take. All right, so some final thoughts. I, so far, really like the München. If you come in with a mindset that she's a Nuremberg and you like that play style and you're comfortable with it, the München is going to be a good fit. The ballistics require some learning, but otherwise the play style and so on will be very similar. You will very much like her improved speed and maneuverability. That will make her more comfortable to play, as well as her better concealment. If you do not enjoy light cruisers, the ones that can get just deleted off the map with a single salvo, and you're not comfortable or you're still learning the positioning and situational awareness and so forth to keep a squishy ship like this alive, this may not be a ship that is well suited for your play styles, or at least not immediately. Once you do get comfortable with that play style and you like that that gameplay, then this can be an excellent ship to play. So I do like her a great deal, but again, it comes down to play styles that you're comfortable with. So I think that's going to wrap up my review of this brand new premium tier 7 German light cruiser, the München. I hope you found the review interesting and useful. Please leave your comments and your thoughts below. And as always, we hope to see you out there on the virtual seas, and we wish you happy sailing.